Silas had kept the clocks of the little town for the better part of 40 years. It was not a grand profession, but it was a needful one, for a town runs on its clocks the way a body runs on its heart, quietly and without much thanks, until the day it stops. Every week Silas made his slow round with his small case of tools. He wound the great clock in the square, and set right the one above the schoolhouse door, and saw to the dozen others in the shops and halls, coaxing each back into agreement with the others, so that the whole town might keep the same time and trust it. He knew the clocks the way a shepherd knows his flock. He knew their small complaints, their tendencies to run fast or slow, the particular sulk each fell into when the weather turned damp. He had never married, and had sometimes thought that the clocks were his family, which he knew to be a lonely sort of thing to think, and thought it anyway, without much minding. They asked little of him and gave a great deal. There was a comfort in their steadiness, in knowing that whatever else a day might bring, the pendulums would swing and the hours would come round in their proper order, faithful as the tide. A man could build a life around such faithfulness. Silas had, and so it was Silas, and perhaps only Silas, who noticed when something began, very quietly, to go wrong. It began with the great clock in the square. One morning Silas was crossing the cobbles when it struck the hour, and something in him, some old instinct tuned by 40 years, felt that it had struck too soon. Only by a little, only by a minute, perhaps. He might have thought nothing of it, for a clock will drift, and drift is a clockmaker's whole living. But when he checked it against the good watch in his pocket, the one he trusted above all things, he found that he was right. The great clock was a minute fast. He set it right, and thought no more of it until the following week, when he found it a minute fast again, and the schoolhouse clock with it, and the one in the baker's, and the one in the meeting hall, every clock in the town, all of them gently and precisely a single minute ahead. Now, this was a true puzzle, and Silas, who had not had a true puzzle in some years, found that it woke him up. For clocks do not conspire. They do not drift together, all in the same direction, all by the same amount. A fast clock and a slow clock and a dozen in between, that is the natural way of things. But a whole town of clocks, marching a minute early in perfect step, that was not drift. That was a hand. Someone was setting them. Someone was going about the town, quietly, and moving every clock a minute forward, week after week, and doing it so gently and so evenly that no one but the clockmaker himself would ever have known. He opened the great clock and studied its workings for a long while by lamplight. There was no fault in it. Nothing was broken or worn. It had simply been set by careful hands, 1 minute fast. He considered, briefly, the possibilities. A prank, perhaps, though it was a strange and gentle prank that harmed nothing and drew no eye to itself. A grudge against the very notion of time, which seemed unlikely in so small a town. A person who simply could not abide being late, and had resolved to make the whole world early to suit them. None of it quite fit. Whoever did this was patient and careful and wanted nothing seen, and that was not the way of pranks or grudges. That was the way of someone with a reason. He sat back and wiped his lens and felt the particular pleasure of a man who has found a mystery worth the solving. So Silas did what any sensible man would do. He waited. He rose long before dawn the next market morning, when he judged the setting was most likely done, and he wrapped himself in his coat against the cold and settled into the dark doorway of his shop, across the square from the great clock, and he watched. For a long while there was nothing but the cold and the dark and his own breath clouding before him. He had time to think in that cold doorway about how strange a thing he was doing, an old man crouched in a shadow to catch another at some unknown mischief. He half hoped he would catch no one at all, that the clocks had some innocent fault he had somehow missed, for he found he did not truly want a culprit. Whoever was doing this had a gentleness in the doing. You could feel it in the evenness of the minute, always exactly one, never more, never careless. It was not the work of anyone who wished the town the least harm. Silas was nearly certain of that before ever he saw a face. And then, just as the sky began to gray, a figure came. An old man, muffled against the chill, moving slowly and without the least secrecy, as though he had done this a great many times and had long since stopped being afraid of being seen. He crossed to the great clock, and he opened the little door at its base with a key of his own, and he reached in, and with the ease of long practice, he moved the time a single minute forward. Then he closed the door and straightened and stood a moment looking up at the clock as though to be sure of it. And Silas, stepping quietly from his doorway, saw that it was old Mr. Corbin, who lived alone at the top of the lane, and who had never, in all the years Silas had known him, caused a moment's trouble to anyone. They stood together a moment in the cold, the clockmaker and the clock setter, two old men beneath the great pale face of the clock, and Silas found that he was not angry, only curious, and perhaps a little ashamed of the small triumph he had felt at solving it, as though he had caught out something that would have been far better left uncaught. Mr. Corbin was not startled to be caught. He only nodded, as though he had rather expected that the clockmaker, of all people, would work it out in the end. And when Silas asked him, gently, why a man would go about in the dark setting all the town's clocks a minute fast, Mr. Corbin told him, simply, that it was for Mrs. Ashby. Silas knew her a little. She lived near Corbin, at the lane's end, an old woman now, and her sight was going, had nearly gone, so that she could no longer read a clock face at all, nor see the hands of her own kitchen clock. What she could still do was hear. Every morning she rose in the dark and listened for the great clock to strike the hour, and by its striking she paced her whole slow morning, her dressing and her breakfast and her walk down the lane to catch the early bus. The bus that went, once each day and no more, to the town 2 valleys over, where her sister lived, her last sister, who was ailing now, and whom she went to sit with as often as her strength allowed. She was missing it, Mr. Corbin said. The bus. By a minute, near enough, every time. She walks so slowly now, you see, and she cannot hurry, and she cannot see to know she must. She would hear the clock strike 8 and set out, and by the time she reached the corner of the bus would be pulling away, and the driver a kind enough man, but a busy one, and gone. And she would stand there, and she would have to wait until the next day to try again, and some days she has not the strength to try at all. I noticed it by chance, Corbin went on. I'll walk early, and I would pass her at the corner, standing there, listening to the bus go, for she could not truly see it go, only hear it. She never complained. She would just turn and start the long, slow walk back up the lane, and I could not bear it. Her sister has not long now. They have only each other, the two of them, at the end of things, and a lost day is not a small thing when there are not many days left. He looked up at the great clock. So I give her the minute. I set the clock a little early, so that when she hears it strike, it is not yet the hour, not quite, and she sets out that little bit sooner, and she reaches the corner while the bus is still there. That is all. It is only a minute. I do not think anyone would miss it. A minute is a small thing to the rest of us. It is the whole of the day to her. Silas stood a while in the graying square, and said nothing, for there did not seem to be anything that wanted saying. He had come out to catch a culprit, and had found instead the kindest crime he had ever heard of. He thought of all the years he had spent making the clocks agree, making them exact, making them true, and it came to him, standing there, that he had perhaps misunderstood a little what the clocks were truly for. They were not for being exact. They were for people. They had always only been for people. And if the truest time the great clock could keep was a minute that let an old woman sit beside her dying sister one more day, then that, and not the position of the sun, was the right time for it to keep. So Silas did not set the clock back. He never set it back again. Instead, he took to keeping it a minute fast himself, carefully, precisely, as a service the town would never know it received, and he showed Mr. Corbin how to do it properly with the right tool, so that no harm should come to the mechanism. It pleased him more than he would have expected, this new and secret duty. For 40 years he had kept the town's time out of duty, and done it well, and thought little of it. Now he kept it out of love for a person he barely knew, and it made the winding of the great clock each week feel like something close to a prayer. He would climb to its workings and set its careful minute early, and think of the old woman at the lane's end, and of the bus, and of the sister waiting 2 valleys over, and he would feel that he was not merely keeping the time at all, but giving it a minute at a time, to someone who needed it far more than the town ever would. And the two old men kept the secret between them. And the great clock chimed its gentle minute early over the square, and every morning at the lane's end, an old woman heard it and rose and set out in good time to catch a bus. Wherever you happen to be tonight, and whatever quiet task is keeping your hands busy, thank you for spending this little while here with us. Rest easy, and whenever you are ready, there will always be another story waiting.